welcome. We begin with US EU intensify pressure on Israel Gaza ceasefire. Australia pledges 3 billion US dollars for AUKUS submarines. China's envoy notes significant gap in Kiev Moscow talks. Port-au-Prince in chaos as war delays promised aid, and New York Attorney General moves to seize Trump assets. Stay with me for these and more stories. The United Nations Security Council is anticipated to vote as soon as Friday on a United States drafted resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza as the European Union called for a humanitarian pause, adding that to the pressure on Israel to end its 5-month-long bombardment of the Palestinian territory. Washington, Israel's firmest ally, has been slowly toughening its tone following its early solid support to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his war in Gaza. The newest draft resolution marks a more hardening of Washington's approach amidst growing war condemnation of a war in which some 32,000 Palestinians have been killed. United Nations experts have also cautioned of an imminent famine as a result of Israel's blockade. The draft U.S. text describes an immediate and sustained ceasefire as an imperative to shield civilians and let the delivery of humanitarian aid. A ceasefire will also be conditional on the release of some of the remaining captives taken by Hamas in its attack on Israel on October 7th. Earlier, the U.S. has avoided referring to a ceasefire and voted United Nations resolutions that have called for one, most recently in February. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, while announcing the Friday vote, said U.S. diplomats had been working on a resolution that would unequivocally support ongoing diplomatic efforts aimed at securing an immediate ceasefire in Gaza as part of a deal which will get hostages released and enable a surge in humanitarian aid. There was some uneasiness at the language used in the U.S. draft, and a second resolution has also been drafted with stronger language that demands an immediate ceasefire. It has the support of 8 of 10 non-permanent members of the 15-member body. The diplomatic steps at the United Nations came as EU leaders meeting in Brussels called for an immediate humanitarian pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza. They also called for the unconditional release of all hostages and urged Israel not to proceed with its plans for a major ground offensive in the southernmost city of Rafah, where over 1 million Palestinians have sought refuge from the war. The EU said such an assault would worsen the already catastrophic humanitarian situation and prevent the urgently needed provision of basic services and humanitarian assistance. The ceasefire calls came as truce dialogues mediated by the US and Qatar and Egypt were set to continue in Doha. Israel spy chief David Barnea will travel to Qatar on Friday to meet mediators, a statement from Netanyahu's office said. Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, who is on his 6th visit to the region since the conflict started, said he believed there could be a deal between Israel and Hamas, which controls Gaza and killed over 1,000 people in its October attack on Israel. Discussions in Qatar have centered on a truce of about 6 weeks that will allow the release of 40 Israeli captives in return for hundreds of Palestinians detained in Israeli jails. The major obstacle has been that Hamas says it will release captives only as part of a deal that will end the war, while Israel says it will deliberate only a temporary pause. Now, Australia is prepared to provide 4.6 billion Australian dollars, that's 3 billion US dollars, to British industry to aid support the construction of nuclear-powered submarines under the AUKUS deal with the United Kingdom and the United States and make sure its new vessels arrive on time. Senior officials from the UK and Australia, as well as the United States ambassador to Australia, visited the naval shipyard where the submarines will be built in the South Australian city of Adelaide in Friday. Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles said, according to reports, at the Osborne shipyard, where he was accompanied by his British counterpart Grant Shapps, as well as the foreign ministers of the two countries, that the three governments involved here are working at pace. Shapps said the submarine program was expansive but necessary. Nuclear-powered submarines are not cheap, but we live in a much more dangerous world where we are seeing a much more assertive region, with China a much more dangerous war all around with what's happening in the Middle East and Europe, Sharp said. The announcement came a day after Australia and the United Kingdom signed a defense deal to better meet security challenges such as China's augmented activity in the South China Sea and the Pacific. Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US first announced the AUKUS Trilateral Security Alliance in 2021 and revealed further details of how Australia will acquire the nuclear-powered submarines a year ago. The 10-year plan will boost capacity at the UK's Rolls-Royce factory in Derby, where the nuclear reactors for the vessels will be built, while the submarines themselves will be constructed by BAE Systems in Adelaide, the state capital of Australia. The Virginia-class submarines will be primarily from a British design, but will have a US weapon system on board. Australia hopes to have 8 nuclear-powered vessels in the water by 2050s, a mix of the new AUKUS-class subs built at home and in the UK, and Virginia-class vessels purchased from the United States. On Russia-Ukraine crisis, Liu Hu, China's special envoy for Ukraine, has said there remained a significant gap between Moscow and Kyiv on peace talks to end the over 2-year-long war, although both agreed it was the best way to resolve the turmoil. Beijing has sought to position itself as a mediator in the conflict, releasing its own 12-point plan for a political settlement and holding several rounds of talks. But while China insists it remains neutral, it has attracted criticism for growing its relationship with Russia even after President Vladimir Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Li and Kyiv and Moscow remain far apart while speaking in Beijing after his newest visit to Russia, Ukraine, France, Germany, and Poland. But he said both recognized talks were the best way to resolve the crisis. Kyiv has stated hope that Beijing will attend a peace conference it is organizing in Switzerland in a few weeks to discuss its proposals for a negotiated peace. Moscow has now been invited to the event and said the effort will fail without its participation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, first announced in November 2022, includes a demand that Russia withdraw all its troops on Ukrainian territory and the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity. Moscow presently occupies about 17% of Ukraine. It has declared the annexation of 4 regions of Ukraine in the south and east, in addition to Crimea, which it invaded and annexed in 2014. Its Ministry of Defense has announced incremental advances on the 1,000 kilometers from line this week, and on Thursday it launched a major missile attack on Kyiv, the first of its kind in 44 days. Lee said, according to reports, that China stood with open arms to accept anything conducive to de-escalation and negotiation. Meanwhile, for 3 weeks, Haiti's capital has been stuck in a disgusting cycle that far surpasses the kidnapping and gang violence for which it was already known. A rebellious league of heavily armed gangs is waging war on the city itself, seeking fresh territory and aiming police and state institutions. Scared and angry vigilante groups are blocking off their neighborhoods with felled trees and chains, killing and burning outsiders suspected of gang membership. It's the only way, they say, to defend themselves. Human remains are lying in the streets, yet the multinational security mission, long touted by Haiti's neighbors as a game changer for its gang problem, is nowhere to be found. Haiti could have changed course. It's been closely 18 months since Prime Minister Ariel Henry first requested for military aid, a period in which the gang steadily expanded their reign of terror across an approximated 80% of the city. Other means exits. Nearly 6 months have passed since the United Nations Security Council authorized a military support mission with the backing of the United States. 2 months have passed since Roberto Alvarez, Foreign Minister of the neighboring Dominican Republic, warned that Council that Haiti stood on the edge of the precipice. When Haiti's gangs started this wave of violence at the end of February, they demanded the resignation of the unpopular Prime Minister. He capitulated, but they kept rampaging. 10 days have passed now since CARICOM announced that Haiti will set up a transitional council, but no one has been named to it. The killings continue each and every day. Now on judicial matters, the New York Attorney General's office has filed judgment in Westchester County, the first sign that the state is getting ready to try to seize Donald Trump's golf course and private estate north of Manhattan, known as Seven Springs. On March 6, state lawyers entered the judgment with the clerk's office in Westchester City County, just 1 week after Judge Arthur Engoron made official his 464 million US dollars decision against Trump, his sons Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, and the Trump Organization. The decision against Trump and the trouble the former president is having securing a bond while he appeals the verdict strikes directly at Trump's image as a billionaire as he tries to raise more cash for both his legal bills and third run for the White House. Entering a judgment will be the first step a creditor will take to try to recover property. Additional moves such as putting liens on assets or stepping to foreclose on properties or taking other actions in court will follow if the asset is going to be seized. The judgment is already entered in New York City, where Trump's properties, including Trump Tower, his penthouse at Trump Tower, 40 Wall Street, his hotel abode in Central Park, and numerous apartment buildings are located. According to a review of records and Thursday rulings, have not been entered in Florida counties, including Miami or Palm Beach, where Trump's Mar-a-Lago property and the Trump National Doral Golf Club and Resort are located, or Cook County, Illinois, where Trump's hotel in Chicago is located. Trump now has 4 days to satisfy the judgment or sway an appeals court to allow him to post a smaller amount or defer posting the payment until after the appeal. On Thursday, Trump said that putting up the money is very expensive and said it was not possible for bonding companies to do in such a high amount. The process to seize assets will not be quick or easy. Trump has structured his business by setting up limited liability companies for nearly every property or asset, over 300 in total, which ultimately are controlled by his trust. On more stories, no less than 3 dead in Kandahar suicide bombing. According to local police and officials, at least 3 people have been killed and 12 others injured in a suicide bombing in front of a bank in Afghanistan's Kandahar city. The ISIL-ISIS group claimed responsibility for Thursday's attack. The explosion at around 8 o'clock a.m. local time aimed a group of people waiting outside the new Kabul Bank branch in central Kandahar city. 3 people were killed and 12 were injured, local police and Taliban officials said. A source at a major hospital in the southern city said that the figure was much higher. Inamullah Samangani, Director of Information and Culture of Kandahar Province, said the bank was busy with people collecting their salaries when the explosion went off. In the aftermath of the explosion, Taliban authorities surrounded the area outside the bank and did not allow media workers to approach the site. On Thursday morning, Samangani said the situation is under control at one of the city's hospitals where the wounded were transported, denying there was an urgent need for blood donations as had been circulated on social media. Moving now to India, India's Bengaluru water scarcity worsens pre-summer. Bengaluru, the city of lavish headquarters of several global software companies in southern India, is drying up. Residents say they are facing the worst water crunch in decades as they witness a strangely hot February and March. Water experts fear the worst is still to come in April and May, when the summer sun is at its steadiest in the city of 13 million residents. Bengaluru has received little rainfall in part due to human-caused climate change in the last few years. Water levels are running desperately low, particularly in poor areas, resulting in sky-high costs for water and a quickly dwindling supply. City and state government authorities are trying to get the situation under control with emergency measures such as nationalizing water tankers and putting a cap on water costs. Authorities say 6,900 of the 13,900 bore wells drilled in the city have run dry, despite some being drilled to depths of 457 meters, that's 1,500 feet. Those reliant on groundwater now have to depend on water tankers that pump from nearby villages. El Nino, a natural phenomenon that affects weather patterns worldwide, along with less rainfall in the city, mean recharge of groundwater levels did not happen as expected. Shanshak Palur, Bengaluru-based hydrologist with the Water, Environment, Land and Livelihood Labs think tank said. A new piped water supply from the Koveri River, about 100 kilometers 16 miles from the city, has also not been completed, adding to the crisis. He said, another fear is that paved surfaces cover closely 90% of the city, stopping rainwater from seeping down and being stored in the ground, said Ramankadra, research scientist at the Center for Ecological Sciences at Bengaluru-based Indian Institute of Science. The city has lost almost 70% of its grain cover in the last 50 years, he said. The Indian government projected in 2018 that over 40% of Bengaluru's residents will not have access to drinking water by the end of the decade. Only those that receive piped water from rivers outside Bengaluru are still getting regular water supply. Coming down to Africa, United Nations Sudan sanctions body cautions of targeted actions. The chair of the Council's committee pursuant to a 2005 resolution on Sudan reported adding in violence against civilians, mostly in West Darfur, and violations of arms embargo. South Korean Ambassador Jung Kook Hong, who chairs the Security Council committee created pursuant to Resolution 1591, briefed the 15-member organ of work recovering the period from 13th December to today, including releasing its annual report for 2023 and receiving the Sudan panel's final reports on 22nd December 2023, as well as its third quarterly report on 23rd February 2024. The sanctions regime enforced on Sudan by the Resolution 1591 mentions parties in the conflict in Darfur, which broke in early 2000s. It also includes asset freezes and travel bans on designated individuals. Sudan's envoy to the United Nations Security Council called for an end to the sanctions, saying it will permit the Sudanese government to better protect its civilians in the war against the RSF. He urged member states to name those responsible for arming the militias on the sanctions list, while Sudan will provide the committee with names of some foreign persons who are involved in the provision of arms to the militias. Citing Resolution 2725/2024, he confirmed his delegation's commitment to work with the Council to end the sanctions. The representative of Algeria focused on paragraph 4 of the briefing, which mentions the flow of weapons and ammunition to Darfur. He remembered an embargo on arms and ammunition in the region, adding that the perpetrators of this trafficking are liable to be sanctioned by the Council. After 90 days, the perpetrators responsible for the arms transport should be identified and denounced by the Council, he stressed. More than 12,000 Sudanese are believed to have lost their lives since the war between the RSF and the Sudanese Armed Forces broke out in April last year. Adam Wosurnu, United Nations Director of Humanitarian Operations, told the Security Council that Sudan might become the world's worst hunger crisis, with 18 million people already facing acute food insecurity. She stressed the need for humanitarian aid, complaining that the United Nations appeal for 2.7 billion US dollars for Sudan was less than 5% funded, receiving just 131 million US dollars. And in part 2, I'll bring you more stories from Nigeria. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Now stories from Nigeria. 16 governors endorse state police reports to FG. 16 state governors have submitted a report stating their backing for creation of state police to the National Economic Council, NEC. They also recommended changes to the constitution to permit for the establishment of state police. The reports were amongst the documentations received at the 140th NEC meeting presided over by Vice President Kashim Shettima at the Aso Rock Villa, Abuja, on Thursday. Special Advisor to the Vice President on Media and Communications, Stanley Okocha, revealed this in a statement he signed Thursday titled NEC endorses takeoff of $617 million US ICE program across states. NEC is still awaiting reports from 20 states. It stated confidence that others will support, according to the statement. NEC was formed by the provisions of Section 153, subsection 1, and paragraphs 18 and 19 of Part 1 of the third schedule of the 1999 Constitution as amended. Its membership comprises the 36 state governors, the governor of the central bank, and other co-opted government officials. Chaired by the Vice President, NEC meets monthly to execute its mandate of advising the President concerning the economic affairs of the Federation, and in particular on measures necessary for the coordination of the economic planning efforts or economic programs of the various governments of the Federation. Revealing deliberation at Thursday's NEC, the Vice President's spokesperson, Nkwocha, said the Secretary to NEC, Mr. Nebuolisa Anako, made a presentation on submissions by states on the state policing initiative. Reports have said received by 16 states on the establishment of state police. 20 states have yet to send in reports. All states across the country expressed their support for the establishment of state police for the following reasons. However, no details were given out about the specific states. The Vice President's spokesperson had affirmed that the total number will be presented at the next NEC meeting, even as the compilation is still going on. This comes weeks after the federal and state governments on February 16, 2024, resolved to develop modalities to create state police to tackle the country's security crisis. On insecurity, Delta killing, no retreat onto culprits, our court, says GOC. The mission handed to troops by the Chief of Army Staff Lieutenant General Tarid Lagwaja is essentially to recover the weapons stolen by the perpetrators of this heinous crime and make sure that all those involved are detained, and that troops will continue to be in the creeks until these objectives are achieved. Major General Jamal Abdul Salam, the General Officer commanding 6th Division Nigerian Army Strong Land Components Commander, Joint Task Force South-South Operation Delta State, while hosting the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of the Niger Delta Development Commission, Dr. Samuel Ogbuku, who paid him a condolence visit at the division's headquarters in Port Harcourt, revealed this yesterday. At present, troops from the defense headquarters are carrying out a manhunt for one Endurance Okode, alias Amang Ben, who is said to be the prime suspect, and others involved in the killing of 17 soldiers and some civilians at Okuma, Uheli South local government area of Delta State. They will remain there until the recovery of all weapons stolen by the perpetrators of the crime and also the arrest of all involved. The GOC assured all that the troops conducting operations over the murder of officers and soldiers at Okuma community will be firm, strong, decisive, and professional in the course of the operations in the general area. Abdusalam, while appreciating the NDDC Managing Director and his team for the visit, reiterated that no amount of propaganda, arm twisting, blackmailing, intimidation, and false narratives will distract troops from staying on course to achieve their objectives. Meanwhile, the GOC assured all that the operations will be conducted most professionally in line with the world best practices of adherence to rules of engagement and respect for the fundamental human rights of the citizenry. He appealed to people and communities to assist troops regarding the location of fleeing suspects and the stolen weapons. He urged the public to avail the Nigerian Army credible intelligence on where to get the criminals and ensure they answer for their crimes, while calling on people of the Niger Delta region to go about their normal activities. Abdusalam maintained that troops will not rest until all those involved are tracked down to account for their deeds. He reassured all that the operation is being conducted in such a way that going forward nobody will contemplate attacking men in uniform. A recap of major stories says US-EU intensify pressure on Israel over Gaza. Australia pledges $3 billion for AUKUS submarines. China's envoy notes significant gap in Kyiv-Moscow talks. Port-au-Prince in chaos as war delays promise aid, and New York Attorney General moves to seize Trump assets. And that's all on the news. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend ahead.